All right, so our last presentation will be Norman Lalancette from Rutgers University, and he's a plant pathologist, and he'll be discussing the biorational control of peach blossom blight.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Phil, I don't think you had to worry about using up my time since there's nobody behind me, so I can just go on and on and on. Well, today I'm going to discuss the management of peach blossom blight. Okay, and I thought about it, and I said, well, I think I should review the biology first, and it's important to have that all in your head when you start looking at control measures. So that's what we're going to do. Let's see here. It's not advancing. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, so we'll first look at some causal agents. What are the causal agents? And then the types of inoculum. And then we'll look at overwintering inoculum sources. And then finally, infection itself and disease development. Okay, so we'll cover those areas for the biology. And then under management, we'll go over the cultural control measures and then also the conventional fungicides that you're currently using, both of those. Okay, review that. And then when we get to the biorational fungicides, I'll show you the results of 2 experiments conducted over 2 years on 5 different biorational materials. Okay, and then we'll cap it all off with a calculation of the percent disease control for those new materials, and therefore their efficacy rating. Okay, and that tells us whether or not they can be used. Okay, causal agents. All right, now there are 3 different fungal plant pathogens of the genus Monolinea, okay, that can cause both blossom blight and the fruit rot phase as well. And the first one is the most important one, Monolinea fructicula. It occurs in all stone fruit growing areas of the United States as well as the world. The second is Monolinea laxa. Now this one is more prevalent out west than it is in the east. East of the Mississippi, we have it sporadically in the mid-Atlantic and the northeast. In my understanding, it doesn't really occur much down here at all. So that's its distribution. And then the final one is Monolinea fructigena, which occurs on both stone and plum fruit. And it does cause a serious apple rot, but fortunately it's only in Europe, at least so far. We haven't seen it here. So the bottom line is, as far as what you should be concerned with down here in the southeast is, of course, the fructicula, since the laxa is not in your area. We also, in the mid-Atlantic and northeast, we seem to see it also, laxa that is, on cherry trees, which is kind of interesting. Okay, now types of inoculum, and there are 2 types. Okay, the first are the ascospores, and these are the sexual spores, okay? And because they result from genetic recombination, every single spore is genetically different, okay? And during bloom in spring, the mummies that are on the ground will start to produce these what's called ascocarps, okay, which then produce the spores. And as I indicate there, in terms of frequency, they do occur, that is the ascocarps and the spores, but it's not very common, okay? And therefore the ascospores are not considered to be an important source of inoculum in terms of driving the epidemic, okay? So keep that in mind. So therefore the second is the conidia, which are the asexual spores. And this is the main type of inoculum for infecting the flowers as well as the fruit. Okay. Now, conidia production begins early in the spring and goes throughout summer, although you can have summers where, if it gets dry and gets hot for any length of time, that could really cut down on the amount of production of conidia. Large numbers are produced on the fruit during the harvest period because you have all these ripe fruit which are highly susceptible, available for infection. And that continues through the harvest period. And that's what drives the epidemic, basically. If you look at that lower photo there, you can see, there, this is like magnified many times, one of those little guys up there. And you can kind of make it out a little bit that they're on chains. And these are all, this is like a clone, right? Because there's no sexual reproduction going on here. So genetically, they're all very similar. Okay, now we'll look at the overwintering inoculum. And there are 5 types of sources of overwintering inoculum. First are the fruit mummies. I'm sure you're all aware of that. And then the fruit stems, or the peduncles. Then there's cankers on the twigs and the branches. And then there is mycelium also that occurs in leaf scars and buds. All right, so this is where the mycelium hides to get ready for the next year in terms of infection. Here's some photographs of the mummies, and you can see the peduncle there, right in that area there, and then down here. Okay, and then of course this shows you the mummies up in the trees are like right next to the flowers. You can't get a better location for them to be in terms of disease development. Okay, now what's the relative importance of these? The most important, of course, are the mummies. I've estimated around 1 times 10 to the 6th, or 1 million spores on a single mummy. So that's a very, very large inoculum source. Peduncles, about 1,000 per peduncle. And then the cankers will usually heal over in terms of going as an overwintering inoculum source going into the winter. Or if they're not healed over, the other thing that can happen is they get invaded by like leucostoma canker, also used to be called cytospore canker. And then even Phomopsis from constriction canker could be a problem in terms of invading those. And then as far as the leaf scars are concerned in the buds, there's very few spores on those. So that's the least of relative importance. Okay, now we'll get to and look at the infection and disease development. And there are 3 factors, environmental factors that are important. First, we need moisture. Free water is necessary for those conidia to germinate, and that could be rainfall or dew. Dew is perfectly fine. Just think how small the spores are. You don't need a whole lot of moisture to wet that spore on the surface of the plant. Temperatures, the range is 32 to 86. Pretty broad range. Optimum is on the warmer side, 77 degrees. So cooler or warmer temperatures delay, but they do not prevent infection. So you have to keep that in mind. For example, at 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 20% of conidia germinate after 1 hour, but 98% germinate in 50 hours. So time can certainly make up for a temperature that's below or above the optimum. And another example there, 81 degrees Fahrenheit, which is on the warmer side, you get 65% germination in only 1 hour. So this disease can move very quickly, whether you're talking about infection in flower or the fruit. And then the third factor that's important is nutrient source. The conidia lack sufficient food reserves in order to germinate, and require nutrients, particularly carbohydrates, from the host. So here's an example. If you take deionized water and you put the conidia in the water, you only get about 0.5% germination. Now you you put sucrose in that water to only 0.1%, or 0.001 in 100 mils, you get 93% germination. So it doesn't take very much in terms of getting these conidia to germinate and infect. Okay, move down. Okay, all right, what about susceptibility of the flower parts? Well, the sepals at the base, which together make up the calyx, and the petals are the least susceptible. Okay, in fact, I've inoculated closed flowers directly with as many as like 50,000 conidia per mil and get no infection. All right. Now, the pistil and the stamens are susceptible, and all parts of them, the stigma, style, and ovary down at the base, all on the pistil, and then the anther and filaments are all susceptible. Now, what's kind of interesting, if you think about it, remember what I just told you about the conidia needing nutrient source. Well, which of these have nutrients available? Well, the petals not so much, the calyx not so much, but certainly the pistil and the stamen have nutrients on them, and part of that is to help the pollen, so that it can go through and fertilize the flower. So in a sense, you could say, well, that's what the pathogen is taking advantage of. Okay, here's some photos, early stages. If we look over here, we can see a stigma right there that's been infected, dark. And there may be a little bit of darkness up there on that anther, maybe down here on that one or that one. Okay. And then later stages, what happens is the pathogen will grow down into the stigma and the anther, and it'll get down to the base, and then what it'll do down at the base is it'll then go up into the sepals and the petals. So they get sort of infected from within going out rather than outside in. Okay, and let's see. Okay, so all right. Now, as far as cankers, what happens here is sometimes the pathogen doesn't stop. In fact, it infects the flowers and then it keeps going. It goes right into the twig, and then you get this elliptical canker formed. Okay, girdling, which is rare, girdling will cause twig blight symptoms. In other words, if it does girdle the branch, all your leaves, everything is going to yellow and die at the tip, and then which makes it very easy to see and therefore cut out. Okay, but that's rare. Usually it doesn't girdle, versus something like constriction canker, which will girdle and will cause flagging. Okay. And as far as the rest of the symptoms, quite often you'll see flower parts sticking to the canker. You'll get gumming. And then under wet, humid conditions, you'll have sporulation, and you can see right there the tufts of conidia. And when you see that, that's obviously diagnostic. You know that you've got a brown rod or blossom blight, I should say. Okay. All right, here's just an example of how bad it can get. These are on my non-treated control trees, okay, and these are some severe epidemics. And if you look down here at the numbers, in 2012 on this Encore block, we had 88% of the shoots with at least one canker, and an average of 3.4 cankers per shoot. And then on a nearby Autumn Glow block, 94% of the shoots with at least one canker, and 6.1 cankers per shoot. Now, the subsequent year, 2013, went down to 26% and 0.3, Autumn Glow 59%, and only one canker per shoot. But even for that 2013 epidemic, that's still way too much. You want, as a grower, you want to see it below, let's say, 5%. I mean, so these are still very high. But that's clearly a weather effect. And then if you look at that one branch there, it's almost like every single flower bud got infected on that thing. And then in this tree nearby, you can see all the infected flowers. I mean, all the branches up here that got infected. Okay. Okay, cultural control strategies. Well, for basically removal of overwintering structures, right? That's our cultural control source for inoculum sources. That's a strategy that we use. Mummies in the canopy, obviously that's one thing that we can do, remove. It's possible. They are large. They are easy to see. And it would be great if when you remove them, if you could also take the peduncle with it. Usually what happens is you just knock them off onto the ground. The peduncle remains, okay? And it's not really practical to go around a tree just looking for peduncles. They're just too small and it would just take too much time. Labor costs would be too high. Twig cankers, you can try to remove those during pruning, but like I said, rarely will they girdle the branch. And so you're not going to have any flagging, which makes them very difficult to find. Okay, so it's going to be difficult to do that, but it's not as critical because they tend to heal over anyway, and they don't end up becoming overwintering inoculum. And then leaf scars and buds, not practical in terms of trying to find them as far as cutting them out, but it's not an important source in terms of the inoculum being low. So clearly mummies and fruit peduncles are the two that are most important. Okay, mummy removal. Let's look at the efficacy and benefits based on when we do that particular activity. Down here, notice on the bottom, I've got this footnote. Mummies require 3 to 5 months for complete decomposition. Now, obviously, that's going to vary with your conditions, right? Down here, they may only require 2 to 4 months. Okay, this is for the Mid-Atlantic. And so if you do your mummy removal in the fall, okay, and you knock all the mummies down onto the orchard floor, you're going to get complete decomposition. All right, little to no inoculum for mummies. All right, if you do it in the wintertime, you're going to get partial mummy decomposition, some inoculum reduction, to the extent that that you taking advantage of some time. You got still some time before spring, and you also have inoculum source displacement. In other words, you move the mummies from the trees onto the orchard floor. If you do it in the spring, there's not enough time for mummy decomposition, so you're going to have close to 100% of your production. The only advantage you're getting is you're basically displacing where the inoculum is occurring. It's not right next to the flower, it's on the orchard floor, but you still have all that inoculum there. Of course, if you were, as I say in the second footnote down there, if you were to remove the mummies from the orchard, then that would take care of all that issue, but we don't, that's just more labor. So clearly, earlier the better in terms of getting rid of the mummies. Okay, conventional fungicides. Well, before we talk about what we're going to need to do for spraying for blossom blight, we really have to consider brown rot first, because I think everyone here will agree with me that the more important control is with the brown rot. Okay, so what we need to do is to reserve the pre-harvest fungicides that we want. In other words, not use them up early in the season. Okay, and so here's a listing of both single active ingredient fungicides that are in the DMI, QI, and SDHI categories. And then we have dual active materials as well. And these are some of our best materials that we have for controlling, in this case, for brown rot. Okay, and we want to reserve them for just use during the pre-harvest season. Use all three chemistries, alternating or in mixtures, whatever it takes for resistance management reasons, okay? So we're going to try not to use these up front, right, during bloom. Since it's the same epidemic, it's the same pathogen from blossom blight all the way through harvest. Okay, so here's what we have, and this is what I recommend for blossom blight. We have Roverol and Meteor, which are both iprodione, the same active ingredient, and they're a dicarboxamide chemistry and have excellent efficacy. Topsin M is another material that also has excellent efficacy, and it's a different chemistry. And then we have the Vanguard and Scala, which are both AP fungicides. So basically we have 2 or 3 different types of materials, different types of chemistry that we can use. And let's face it, the iprodione materials and the Vanguard, I'm not sure, I don't think the Scala, but they're not registered for use after bloom, after petal fall anyway. So why not use them up front, especially if we have the kinds of efficacies that I'm showing here. All right, so, and then down at the bottom, I'm showing the protectant materials that we have, which we don't have to worry about resistance there, but by and large, mostly they're only provide about fair level of control. I used to think that Bravo did a better job, but after looking at all my data over the years, I had to demote it from good down to fair. Okay, so here is what I would recommend. Is a pretty straightforward. We got at pink, which would be about 5% pink, 5% of the flowers open. You would apply either Vanguard or Scala. Then at full bloom, let's say 75 to 100% bloom, we would apply either Roverol Meteor, or again, they're the same AI. And then for petal fall, I usually recommend a second spray of the Roverol and Meteor. Okay, you got to be careful with the Topsin M, because some of us do have resistant strains out there, and if it's a high enough frequency, that could be a problem. Although the risk of having a problem with that blossom blight is a lot less, obviously, than a risk would be if it was being used pre-harvest for fruit, because you lose your crop. Okay, now there's one other situation I'll take into account here, and because we do have to consider other diseases when we get into the petal fall timing, and I'll just discuss this as one situation, and that is what if we have a high amount of scab? Okay. Well, the first 2 sprays can stay pretty much the way they are, either like Vanguard and Roverol, for example. And then what we want to do is replace the 3rd spray up here with Flint Extra. All right. Now, I've done a lot of work on this, but Flint, trifloxystrobin, it's a QOI fungicide. Okay, it can have a dramatic effect on reducing the sporulation of scab cankers on the twigs. Okay, and if you apply a Flint Extra spray at petal fall, and then a second one at shuck split right after that, and then go into a Captan program, you'll pretty much take care of all that inoculum that's on those twigs, shut it down for the full season with only 2 sprays. Works out pretty well. And then next year you can come in back to the standard program. You don't want to stay on that program, because as a QOI fungicide, the Flint is highly at risk of resistance development. So it's important to only use it temporarily to get the inoculum level down and get control, and then now you can go back to your regular program. Okay. All right, so biorational fungicides, I'm going to show you the results from the 2 studies that we did. But before we get to that, you're probably thinking, what is a biorational fungicide? All right, I kind of use it interchangeably with organic, but I think it would be a good idea to look at the a definition. And here's one that I got out of one of my books. I was surprised that it was 1998 when this book was published, but anyway. Biorational pesticides, pests and disease control agents of biological origin, including bacteria, fungi, nematodes, viruses, and here's the phrase that's real important, biochemical products of natural origin. Okay, so if you think about it, what about if we take a material such as potassium bicarbonate? Okay, that's called, one of the products is Calagreen, Armacarb, Ecomate, okay. Potassium bicarbonate, is very closely related to the sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda. Okay, so it's registered by Ethan Organic. They all have OMRI registrations, okay, as far as being an organic material. But it doesn't fall into any of the categories, right, for biorational. So in a sense, all biorational materials are organic, but not all organics are biorational. So it's a more narrow definition of a natural material. Okay, now let's get on to the experiments. All right, so here's the first field study, and we had these 3 materials that we looked at. The Regalia that has an active ingredient of extract of giant knotweed. Okay, so that does fit into that biorational category. The Astargus, which is Bacillus amyloliquus and then also polyoxin D, which is a type of an antibiotic that is effective on fungi, not bacteria. All right. Okay, and then as far as M&Ms, the orchard was a 6-year-old glowing star on level, and we used air blast, 100 gallons to the acre. Pretty standard design and statistics there. And then we did this study in 2021 and 2022. Repeated it. All right, here are the results from 2021. And you can see that the horizontal axis is percent of shoots with canker. Okay. And we've got 50% of our shoots are infected on the non-treated control. Here's our standard, which got Vanguard at pink, Roverall at both bloom and petal fall. Okay. Now, there's 2 things we want to look for when we're examining the biorationals in here. First, we want to make sure that it's significantly lower than the non-treated control. Okay, which they are obviously. Okay, because they got different letters, they're significantly different. Okay, so that criteria is met. And then the second thing is we want to have it so that they're either equal statistically to the standard, so they're just as good as the standard, or better than the standard, which is the case later on, we'll see. Okay, so this looks pretty good, right? I was pretty happy, and by the way, they're all 5% or lower, and that's also good. All right, because we do have to look at percent control, and we'll touch on that later. All right, so what about 2021? Okay. Well, we had a little bit higher amount of disease here, a little bit more disease pressure. And the standard did a pretty good job, although 10% is on the high, a little bit higher side. But look what happened here with the 3 biorationals. They're all significantly less than the non-treated, so they are still effectively preventing some of the blossom blight, but they're all higher than the standard. But the thing to really look at here is each of these. This is 4 times higher than the standard up there. This is about 7 times higher than the standard up there. This one here is about 6 times higher than that one up there. Okay, and the OSO is 14 times higher. Okay, they're all coming in a lot higher, including the standard. Well, what happened? Well, we had a frost. Okay, and the frost pretty much in full bloom on the glowing star. And that basically killed all the flowers off. Now, some infection had occurred. Did we get an infection after on the dead fall. I don't know. That's still possible. We know that's possible because we see that after petal fall, and that's why we have a petal fall spray. All right, but I think we had some what I'm going to call interference from the frost here. It increased the susceptibility. That's why all those numbers are higher. That's my thinking on this, okay? So, all right, now let's go on to the next study, field study 2. And this had both howler and thea in it. Howler has an active ingredient, Pseudomonas chloreorephis, and then Bacillus subtilis for thea, so they both fall within the biorational realm, both bacteria. And then as far as our materials and methods, this was on a much older block, an autumn glow block on Lovell rootstock also, air blast 100 gallons per acre, and then in both 2021 2022. Okay, so here's what we got in 2021. Good weather conditions, no bloom problems. 55% of the shoots with at least one canker. And then we had a switch, a little bit of a switch here. We had a Vanguard Roverall, and then we had a switch over to Flint. And that was because we were starting to see some scab come in, and so we had to change that to that program I was telling you about, okay? What's really interesting here is, well, of course, both of these are significantly less than the non-treated, so they are showing that they have efficacy against the disease. But the howler, interestingly, is more significant and has significantly lower disease than the standard. Now, why did that happen? Well, one idea, I think that what happened here is that Roverall is a little bit stronger than Flint on blossom blight. And so normally we would have had this number lower, and therefore there wouldn't have been a difference between those two. All right, that's probably what happened. What I should have done is maybe added Cefactam in with the Flint, give it a little extra boost for that reason. But anyway, and then the thea is not significantly different from the standard either. Okay. All right. Now what happened as far as the freeze and the autumn glow? Well, autumn glow, as the name implies, is a later variety, and so we only had about a fourth to maybe a third of the shoot got damaged from the frost. The rest of the flowers hadn't opened yet. Okay. So in this case, again, we see all of these not significantly different from the non-treated, so they are effective, and they were all equivalent in control to in this case. Now we're back to the Vanguard Roverall because we took care of the scab with the Flint up here, so we're back to the standard program. Okay, but these are all, again, these down here are all higher than what we have up here. So I think we are still getting some effect, although it's less of an effect, probably because only part of the shoot was affected by the frost. Okay. All right. All right. So now that we have all that data, we can calculate our percent disease controls, and then also come up with an efficacy rating. Here's the standard formula that we use. DI stands for disease incidence, so that would be percent of infected shoots. And then so we subtract the DI of a treatment from the non-treated, and you can see as your treatment gets closer to the non-treated control in amount, that approaches zero, and so it gets smaller and smaller. So that means you have lower and lower percent control, which is obviously not a good thing. Okay, so we do that for all of our 5 treatments, materials, and then we go to this very simple table here. And if you were between 91 and 100%, it's considered excellent. 81 to 90 is very good. 71 to 80 is good, and then so on. Okay, so what did we get? Okay, well, here's what we got in 2021. We had 3 materials, the Regalia, the Oso, and the Howler, that all came out as excellent in terms of their control. The Stargus and the Thea were close behind, both at very good. And I should point out one other thing. This came very close to being excellent, right? Because 91 was the cutoff, okay? Versus this one here is a bit lower, okay? But everything looked good in that year. That was a normal year. Then what happened when we had the frost? Well, you could probably figure it out, right? Just by looking at those earlier numbers. Not too good. We went from 92 down to 60% control for the Regalia. Okay, so that's a 30% drop. This is a 50% drop from 90 down to 40. The Oso from 95 down to 46. A big drop there as well, about 45%. all poor efficacy, obviously, when you have that much of only that low a level of control. Now, the Howler and the Thea did a little bit better. As you can see, they came out good, and the reduction wasn't as great. Okay, but that I think was because we only had a small amount of that shoot that got hurt by the cold. The rest hadn't opened up yet. So I think this is further evidence that the freeze did have an effect on susceptibility, or somehow increased the likelihood of canker forming. So that's it. I'll be happy to take any questions. Oh, and I really would have loved to have had 2 great years. Then I could put them together. I could have told you the percent control that we would expect to get from these, and what the rating was. Have it in a program, ready to use. But so we'll be doing the repeating the experiment this year on both of those blocks, and hopefully the new data will agree with the 2021 data. Okay, not this year's data. And I have no problem, if that happens, of throwing this year's data out the door, because we know we had the frost and what it did to the branches, or the flowers, I should say. So, okay, any questions? Craig.
Is it worth spraying after a frost a second time, knowing that you're going to lose effectiveness, even though you have a lot of flowers?
Right, yeah. I mean, these materials, including the standards, didn't seem like they made a difference as far as trying to give you control during a freeze. Which, why would that be? You would think you'd still get some control. Now when we do our assessments, we look for the spores, because that confirms that we have the brown rot in there. Because, what is it possible that some of these we were counting a dead, from the frost, a dead flower from the frost.
Live off dead material, the dead tissue?
Yeah, I mean, that's why this has always been a question. You got your pink bloom, and then the petal. Do we need a petal fall spray? Well, we need it obviously for the other diseases, but there seems to be some evidence that we can get infection even at that time.
That material is dead and it stays on, it doesn't fall off, so if millennia can switch.
Yeah, I think what's happening is that that we try to spray as close to 100% petal fall, but sometimes it's earlier, and I think there are still flowers there that are in better condition, that are like earlier stages, that are part of the petal fall. You see what I'm saying? So, and that's why we need to spray, because we still have some flowers there that are not full petal fall. Yeah. Okay. Got lots of time before dinner.
Okay. All right. Well, that concludes our peach education session. If you have the pink papers, just leave them over there by the iPad, and just make sure that you scan your barcode on there so that you're checked in if you did not, and just enjoy the rest of your time in Savannah. Thank you.